Hi, I have another story. Myra gazed out of the window of the jet airplane at the tops of the pillowing white clouds below the plane's wing. The sunrise illuminated the water vapor into a golden red glow. She was lost in the whirlwind of the last month of vacation with her boyfriend, Lucas. He had shown her the best parts of Europe with the flair that only a billionaire could do. They had eaten at the most exclusive restaurants. They shopped where items of wealth had no price tags. The two of them stayed in villas in the most beautiful places Myra had ever seen. Myra felt as if she had become a princess overnight and struggled with this new life of affluence. Lucas had charmed her with his knowledge, power, and love of money. Myra saw everyone bow to him in service in all that they did, whether it was literally with their heads or with the changing of their wills to appease Lucas. Myra was charmed and became smitten. She fell into his arms when they were alone and stayed until morning. Often she could not stop looking into his eyes, no matter how beautiful the mountains or beaches were where they had dined. Myra was lost to herself in the whirlwind of fantasy that was created by the wealth of a handsome man. A sparkle of light twinkled from her wrist and blinded her eye. She looked at her wrist at the diamonds embedded in the gold bracelet that Lucas had bought for her on one of their shopping forays. Her right hand fondled the jewels, and they responded with more reflections of the rising sun. Her eyes went to the ring on her finger. This band of gold had in its grip a large diamond that competed for her attention from the bracelet. She wondered why she was chosen by Lucas to be his choice for a future wife. She calculated her wealth compared to the price of the bracelet, for she knew its cost, as she was told secretly by the merchant woman that placed it upon her wrist when Lucas was looking at the watches at the jewelry store. "You are lucky to have such a rich and handsome man," she said in a shiver of jealousy. Myra smiled, entranced by the diamonds. Now that Myra sat alone on his plane headed back to the States, she had time to unpack the last month. Lucas was on his other plane heading to Chicago for a meeting. Myra thought about her meager upbringing, how she and her family sometimes went to bed hungry, how she hardly saw her parents because they both worked to pay for their simple lives. Myra had grown up poor. However, God had given her beauty, grace, and a loving heart that could charm anyone. This is how and why she had fallen into the arms of Lucas. She thought of him and what he was doing at this very moment. She thought of the times where they lay wrapped in each other's arms. She saw his deep blue eyes and got lost in her memory of them once more. She remembered her question she had asked him in the early light of the morning in a villa that overlooked the rolling hillside of vineyard grapes. "How did you get so rich?" she asked him as she stroked his blonde hair. Lucas laughed loudly, and his tone was very different than his normal charm. He said, "Small print," then distracted her with a kiss. Now, Myra was wondering what small print Lucas was referring to. She knows that he owns one of the biggest insurance companies in the world, but that is all that she knows about his work. The plane started its descent through the clouds, and as it entered them, it shook from the turbulence. Myra gripped the armrests of the small jet. As they pulled out of the clouds, she saw a small wisp of water vapor swirl off of the tip of the plane's wing and dissipate. Myra could now see the city below. All of the houses packed closely together, much like the grapes on the vines at the vineyard where she had heard Lucas's uncaring laughter. Uncaring, she whispered. That's what that was. She bit her lip and noticed that she had done so. It was something that she and her mother did when they witnessed injustice but wanted to remain in grace. She looked out of the small window again and saw the lines of cars on the highway racing off to the parking lots of the jobs of the commuters. Jobs necessary for the survival of all the families from the homes below. Families that know the struggle like her family had known. Myra closed her eyes and relived the past month. She felt sick to her stomach. The plane landed at the small airport, and Myra left the plane and was met by a chauffeur in a fine black suit waiting by a Mercedes. He opened the passenger side rear door and said to her, "I hope your flight was enjoyable." Myra mocked a smile at his empty question. He closed the door and got behind the wheel. "Please take me home," Myra said. "Yes, ma'am," he replied in his professional politeness. They left the airport and traveled down the highway. They entered into the line of cars that fought for position on the roadway as the drivers did for one of status. "I know a shortcut if you don't mind going through a bad part of town," the chauffeur asked Myra. "That's fine," she said. They pulled off of the highway at the next ramp. The stress of traffic ceased as they entered a neighborhood. Myra looked through the darkly tinted windows at the squalor of this part of town. She saw empty houses with broken windows and missing front doors. She saw people passed out drunk or from drugs lying about on lawns, sidewalks, or propped up against buildings. Trash was everywhere. Her mind switched from this reality back and forth to the month of fantasy that was her life just a day ago. They turned a corner and more of the same. Myra stared and her heart ached for the people outside of the car. They drove along for some time and the neighborhood seemed to be getting worse. Myra's eyes caught those of a young girl standing in the front yard of a small home. She was wearing a bright yellow dress that was clean despite all of the surroundings. The young girl's face had a smile even in the midst of all this despair. Myra saw an old lady sitting on a rocking chair with watchful eyes focused on the girl playing. "Stop the car!" Myra shouted. The chauffeur braked and pulled over to the curb skillfully. Myra jumped out of the Mercedes and gathered herself. She took a deep breath and walked back to the yard where the little girl in the yellow dress played. The chauffeur watched from the driver's seat in the rearview mirror. He saw Myra walk to the gate and say something. Then he saw her open the gate and shut it behind her. He adjusted the mirror to see more. Then he noticed that the old woman stood up from her rocking chair to oversee this encounter. Myra kneeled down and spoke with the girl. He saw her push the girl's hair from her face and caress her head. He watched the two talk for a few moments. He saw a smile return to Myra's face as she had handed something to the child. The little girl took whatever it was and stared into her little hands. Myra and the girl embraced as they were sisters, or mother and child. Myra stood up as the little girl in the yellow dress ran up to the porch to her grandmother. The driver saw the adults then wave to each other in respect and honor. Myra turned and left the yard, closing the gate behind her. She walked back to the car in a new gait with her head held high. A smile that was as one that she had from her playful childhood. She opened the car door and sat down on the rich black leather seats and closed the door. The driver pretended that he did not see what had just happened and waited. "Home, please," Myra requested. The driver replied, "For sure." As he looked Myra in the eyes through the rearview mirror with a newfound respect for her. The two rode in silence for the rest of the trip. The chauffeur pulled up to the curb in front of Myra's high-rise apartment building. Myra gathered her things and opened the door to leave. The driver called to her in a tone of recognition. "Miss Myra, I notice that you have seemed to lose things of value. If I happen to find them in the car, I will forward them to your residence." Myra looked at him as he turned his head wearing a bright smile. "No need to look, driver. They were not lost. They were placed in the hands of those that needed such value. Thank you for the ride. God bless you, sir." She stepped from the car and closed the door. "And you too, Miss Myra," the driver said as he pulled away in Lucas's shiny black Mercedes. Shalom.